updated one's cells in Greek life. L12 good evening, wanderers of the late-night internet. If you're here, I imagine it's because the day has worn itself out around you. Maybe your eyes are heavy with the weight of spreadsheets or screens, or perhaps you're that rare breed who's still wide awake at this hour, staring into the void with the quiet certainty that you'll eventually solve the mysteries of the universe by 3 a.m. If you'd like to let me know where in the world you're listening from, I'd be gently curious to hear it. Just a passing thought, no pressure, like tossing a pebble into a dark pond and waiting for the ripples to come back. And if you've been here before, or if this is your first stumble upon my little corner of the internet, know that a quiet nod of support, whether through a subscription, a like, or just the faint hum of your approval in the digital ether, would mean more than I'm comfortable admitting. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The night is young, and so is our conversation. Now, settle in, dim those lights if you can, and let's wander through an ancient field together, one where farmers once prayed to Demeter but, for reasons that are as fascinating as they are practical, mostly left Dionysus to his vines. Why did they do that? Well, that's the question we'll unravel tonight, layer by layer, like peeling back the husk of a grain kernel, revealing something that looks simple on the surface, but is, in fact, deeply complex and rooted in the rhythms of life, survival, and the quiet terror of nature. So, where to begin? Not with myths. Oh no, those are lovely, but they're like the glitter on a cake. They make it shine, but if you scratch too hard, you'll find something more practical beneath. No, we'll start in the dirt itself, in the fields of ancient Greece, where farmers didn't have the luxury of romanticizing their work. They had to eat, and that's where Demeter comes in. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, and her domain wasn't just wheat or barley. It was the entire asterisk cycle. The planting, the waiting, the sweating under the sun, the praying for rain, the carefully measured furrow, the hope that the soil wouldn't betray you. She was the patroness of farmers because farming in ancient Greece wasn't a gentle, pastoral idyll. It was a high-stakes gamble against the whims of weather, pests, and the capricious nature of the earth itself. A bad year could mean starvation, social unrest, or even the collapse of a community. So when Demeter smiled, crops grew lush. When she frowned, blight spread like wildfire. But Dionysus was something else entirely. He was the god of wine, of ecstasy, of the unraveling of civilized behavior, of the kind that comes from too much to drink or too much of certain substances asterisk. He was the patron of theater, of revelry, of the moment when order collapses and anything can happen. In his cults, people dressed in animal skins, howled at the moon, or whatever passed for a moon in ancient Greece, and engaged in rites that were as much about psychological release as they were about worship. Now, I'm not saying Dionysus was asterisk bad asterisk, far from it. He was one of the most beloved gods, especially among the young, the restless, and those who craved something beyond the daily grind. But here's the thing. Farmers didn't need Dionysus in the way they needed Demeter. They had enough chaos in their lives without inviting more. A farmer's existence was already a series of controlled risks, planting at just the right time, hoping for rain, but not too much, praying that the locusts would spare your field this year. Add to that the unpredictability of Dionysus. His cults were famous for their wild, sometimes dangerous ecstatic rites, and you've got a recipe for disaster in someone whose livelihood depended on stability. Consider this. When Dionysus showed up in a village, he didn't come with a plow or a seed bag. He came with his retinue of maenads, half human, half beast, their frenzy, a far cry from the disciplined labor of sowing and reaping. His followers weren't there to measure bushels of grain. They were there to lose themselves in wine, music, and the kind of abandon that could lead to, well, let's just say it wasn't always pretty. There are stories, some mythic, some historical, of Dionysus, cults turning violent, of initiates being torn apart by maenads in a fit of divine madness. That's not exactly the kind of god you want overseeing your next harvest. Demeter, on the other hand, was about asterisk order asterisk, not the stifling, bureaucratic order of a city-state, but the organic order of growth, seed to sprout to stalk to grain. She was the goddess who taught humankind how to tend the earth, who gave them the gift of agriculture in the first place, according to one version of her myth. Her rites were measured, ritualized. The Eleusinian mysteries, for example, were a series of carefully staged revelations that took place over 9 days, culminating in a procession where initiates saw symbols of the cycle of life and death. It was serious business, not the kind of thing you did while half lost in wine-fueled ecstasy. And let's talk about practicality for a moment. Wine, while intoxicatingly delicious, wasn't exactly a staple crop. Yes, grapes were grown, but they weren't the foundation of the diet like wheat or barley. A farmer could lose his entire year's labor if his vines failed, but that was a specialized risk. Most farmers didn't bet their survival on wine, they bet it on grains. So while Dionysus might have been worshipped in cities, where people had the luxury to indulge in the finer or less fine things, and among philosophers who saw in his cults a kind of liberation, he wasn't exactly a daily concern for someone whose children needed to eat. There's also the matter of asterisk time asterisk. Demeter's cycle was tied to the agricultural calendar, planting in autumn, harvesting in summer. Dionysus festivals, on the other hand, often fell outside that cycle, sometimes during winter when the fields lay fallow, or during times of celebration that had little to do with sustenance. A farmer in the middle of sowing season wasn't going to drop everything for a bacchanal, no matter how tempting it might seem. But let's not mistake this for some kind of moral judgment. The Greeks weren't saying, Dionysus is bad, Demeter is good. Oh no, they were far too sophisticated for that. Dionysus was beloved precisely because he offered something Demeter didn't, freedom from the constraints of daily life. He was the god you turned to when you wanted to forget your worries, if only for a night. And in a world where survival was never guaranteed, the occasional escape must have been a relief. So why then did farmers pray to Demeter but not Dionysus? Because Demeter was asterisk necessary asterisk. She was the difference between a full granary and an empty one. Dionysus was a delight, a luxury, something for those who could afford the indulgence of stepping outside the rhythm of survival. For the farmer, prayer wasn't just about hope, it was about asterisk practicality. It was about making sure that the gods who controlled the earth's bounty were on your side, not against you. And yet there's a quiet irony here, isn't there? Dionysus, the god of wine, was also the god of revelation asterisk, of uncovering truths hidden beneath the surface. In some myths, he's said to have brought wine from India or Egypt, a gift that transformed human civilization. But for the farmer, the revelation wasn't in the intoxicating effects of wine. It was in the slow, patient work of coaxing life from soil. Demeter's revelations came through the mysteries, where initiates saw symbols of death and rebirth, not in the form of ecstatic frenzy, but in the quiet, cyclical renewal of the harvest. So next time you're at a dinner party, perhaps over a glass of wine, Dionysus, own ambrosia, and someone asks why we celebrate Demeter's gifts more than his, remember this. It wasn't because they didn't appreciate him. It was because for most people, survival came first. And Demeter was the goddess who held that survival in her hands. But let me take you a step further now, to where things get even more interesting. Because while farmers might not have prayed to Dionysus in the same way, they did interact with him, just not as a patron god of agriculture. Dionysus wasn't entirely absent from rural life. He was just different there. In some regions, particularly those with strong viticultural traditions, Dionysus was asterisk worshipped, but not as a god of wine alone. He became associated with the asterisk wildness asterisk of nature itself, the untamed forests, the creatures that lurked in them, even the dangers that came with the land when it wasn't under human control. In Arcadia, for example, his cults took on a more chthonic, earthbound character. He wasn't just about wine. He was about the raw, untamed power of the earth, the kind that could as easily nurture as it could destroy. And here's where the tension becomes fascinating. Farmers needed to tame the earth, Demeter's domain. But Dionysus represented the wild, the untamed, the part of nature that resisted control. So while they might not have prayed to him for a good harvest, they recognized his presence in other ways. There are stories of farmers encountering Dionysus in the woods, or of his maenads wandering into fields at night, their howls echoing like distant storms. But why would farmers tolerate, or even invite, a god who seemed so opposed to their way of life? Because nature is all asterisk about control. There's a delicate balance between cultivating and letting things wild grow, between order and chaos. Dionysus wasn't just a threat. He was also a reminder that the earth couldn't be entirely tamed, no matter how hard you tried. So perhaps the real question isn't why farmers didn't pray to Dionysus for their fields, but why they did acknowledge him elsewhere. Because in doing so, they recognized something essential about themselves and their world. They knew that life wasn't just about Demeter's measured cycles. It was also about Dionysus, wild abandon, the part of existence that couldn't be planned or controlled. And this duality, order and chaos, control and surrender, isn't just a Greek thing. It's human. We see it in our own lives, in the way we structure our days with routines but still crave moments of spontaneous joy, in how we build cities but long for the wilderness within them. The Greeks understood this better than most. They gave us the word dichotomy for a reason. But let's not get too philosophical. There's another practical reason why Dionysus didn't feature prominently in farmers' prayers. He was often associated with urban life, with the excesses of cities like Athens or Thebes, where people had the time and resources to indulge in his cults. Rural areas, on the other hand, were more about survival than spectacle. Dionysus, festivals. Think of the Great Dionysia, a citywide event with theater, processions, and all manner of revelry, were simply too extravagant for the daily concerns of farming. And yet, there's evidence that Dionysus did have rural followers, particularly in regions where wine was a significant part of the economy. In places like Naxos or Andros, his cults were tied to local traditions of viticulture, and his image appeared on votive offerings from winemakers. So while most farmers might not have prayed to him for their daily bread, those who dealt in wine, perhaps as producers or traders, saw him as a crucial figure. This brings us to another layer, the social aspect of worship. Praying to Demeter wasn't just about ensuring a good harvest. It was about reinforcing social bonds. The Eleusinian mysteries, for example, were open to men and women alike, though with some exclusions, and they brought together people from different classes under the banner of shared belief. It was a way to say, we're all in this together, farmers, city dwellers, nobles, freemen, slaves, and we all depend on Demeter's goodwill. Dionysus cults, on the other hand, were often more exclusive or chaotic. Some of his rites were initiated only by men, and others involved elements of secrecy that could be, let's say, intense asterisk. There are accounts of people being initiated into Dionysus, mysteries through experiences that bordered on psychological breakdown. Hardly the kind of thing you want to encourage in a community where everyone needs to pull together for the harvest. So while Demeter's worship was about unity and practical cooperation, Dionysus was often about individual transformation or even dissolution. One reinforced social order, the other challenged it. But here's where things get truly interesting. In some cases, Dionysus was invoked by farmers, not as a god of wine, but as a protector against, well, let's say other agricultural threats. There are myths and inscriptions that suggest Dionysus was sometimes called upon to protect vines from pests or bad weather, or even to bless the first fruits of the grape harvest. So while he wasn't a daily deity for most farmers, he was a god who could be turned to in moments of crisis, when Demeter's usual blessings weren't enough. This duality, Demeter for stability, Dionysus for the unexpected, reflects a deeper truth about ancient Greek religion. The gods weren't just patron figures. They were asterisk tools, asterisk, each with their own domain and their own way of interacting with the world. Demeter was for the predictable cycles of life. Dionysus was for the moments when those cycles broke down, when chaos intruded, or when you needed something beyond the ordinary. And let's not forget the asterisk political asterisk angle. In a society where city-states were constantly vying for power, religion wasn't just about personal piety. It was about identity and control. Demeter's cults were often tied to local agricultural traditions, which meant they reinforced regional loyalties. Dionysus, on the other hand, had a more asterisk cosmopolitan asterisk appeal. His worship spread across Greece, sometimes as a unifying force, but also as a way for cities to assert their cultural dominance. For example, Athens, Great Dionysia was not just a religious festival. It was a political event where plays were performed that could be as much about civic pride as they were about divine worship. Farmers, who were often tied more closely to local traditions than to city politics, would have had less reason to engage with Dionysus in this way. But let's take a moment to consider something else. The asterisk gender asterisk dynamics at play here. Demeter was overwhelmingly a goddess associated with women, both as a mother figure and as a symbol of female labor. Think of her myth where she searches for Persephone, or the way her mysteries included rituals that emphasized feminine mystery. Dionysus, on the other hand, had a more androgynous asterisk reputation. His cults were followed by both men and women, but they often involved elements that could be read as either masculine, ecstatic frenzy, or feminine, the nurturing aspect of wine-making. Now, I'm not suggesting this was some kind of deliberate contrast, though it certainly could have been seen that way. But it's worth noting how these associations played out in practice. Farmers who were overwhelmingly men, with women often doing much of the labor but holding less social power, might have found Dionysus appealing precisely because he was just asterisk about male or female roles. He was about something beyond that. But again, this is getting us into territory where we start to wonder if there's a deeper symbolism at work here. Something about the balance between order and chaos, control and surrender, structure and spontaneity. And perhaps there is. After all, the Greeks were masters of seeing dualities everywhere. Life and death, light and dark, reason and passion. But let's bring this back down to earth, or rather into the fields, where the practical concerns of farming still ruled. For most farmers, Dionysus wasn't a god they turned to for guidance. He was a god they recognized as part of their world, even if they didn't actively worship him. And here's the thing, that recognition mattered. Even if you weren't praying to Dionysus every day, his presence in the landscape, whether in the form of a sacred grove, a festival, or just the stories passed down through generations, was a reminder that life was just asterisk about Demeter's cycles. There was space for wildness, for excess, for the unexpected. So why did farmers pray to Demeter but not Dionysus? Because Demeter was the god of asterisk sustenance asterisk, the one who ensured that the fields would yield, that families wouldn't starve, that society could function. Dionysus was the god of asterisk transformation asterisk, the one who reminded them that life wasn't just about survival. It was also about joy, about change, about breaking free from the routine. And perhaps this is why, in the end, the Greeks gave us both Demeter and Dionysus, not as opposites, but as two sides of the same coin. One represented the order we need to thrive, the other, the chaos that keeps life from becoming too rigid, too predictable. So next time you're out in a field, or even just sipping wine on a warm evening, remember that you're part of this ancient tradition. You're acknowledging both Demeter's practical blessings and Dionysus' wild abandon, whether you realize it or not. And isn't that the way life